So the Down syndrome child in America today, 90 out of every 100 are killed. In Europe, 95 out of every 100 are killed. It's not their choice. It's the choice of someone else. And they start to convince you, your life is only worth living if it's meaningful, if there's no pain, if there's this and that. Otherwise, it's better for someone not to allow you to even be born, save you from suffering, save you from pain, or later on, if you're suffering and your life is not meaningful, we'll end it by euthanasia. So slowly but surely, we began to accept the new fifth commandment of God. Actually, it's the new fifth commandment of man. Thou shalt not kill an innocent human person unless the quality of their life is not acceptable to you. Then you can kill them. And so what has happened is this mentality, okay, is now to the point where euthanasia has been legalized. Not only that, in the so-called reproductive labs, by the way, don't use the term reproduction of human beings. It's very important you don't use their terminology. You use their terminology, you will never win the argument. They got you. For example, to say that a child has to be born to be a citizen before it receives rights. Wait a second. Personhood, humanity, has absolutely nothing to do with being born or unborn. Personhood, humanity, has nothing to do with being a citizen. And all of a sudden we start to convince people that because the child is not yet born and not yet a citizen, you can kill him. What are you talking about? Well, it's not a person, it's not a human being. You mean people from Australia that visit the United States, they're not citizens? You see? They're tourists. So we can kill them all because they're not persons, they're not humans? It's illogical and consistent. It's nuts. But we make people start to, you see, you always precede social engineering by verbal engineering. And once you are doing this game, and so in the laboratories today, I don't know if you realize this, no child conceived in a petri dish in the laboratories today is allowed to be implanted in a mother's womb if it fails the test. We didn't know there was a test. There is a pre-implantation genetic diagnostic test. If the child fails the test, it is destroyed without exception. In the United Kingdom, in England, so it's the law. Throughout the world since '91, it is the practice. So the children in the laboratories are screened out. There is a diagnostic genetic test done, and the parents don't even know it. And there is no exceptions. They are all destroyed. So there's a scientific, eugenic, clean cleansing of the human race going on in these fertility labs all across the world. It's the reality of it. It's the reality of it. And so what is happening is, you see, when you were born at home, where God intended to be born, you didn't have to pass a test. Thanks be to God. I would have failed it. Everyone, your love for your own sake. You're my child. There's no such thing as a test. What is this test? If you're conceived in a laboratory, you have to pass the test. Now, when you were brought into existence, you were not reproduced. It's impossible to reproduce any one of you. Every one of you are unique and special. Why? Because when a human being comes into existence, God calls mom and dad to cooperate with God, and God is a new act of creation. Every time a child is brought into existence, in the new act of creation, God made your soul. You're made in the image of God. And there never was and never will be another one like you. And you are for all eternity. And man, mom and dad cooperates with God, the body and the soul, and it's a person. You can't reproduce a person. You reproduce animals. You can't be reproduced. Everyone is special and sacred. It's to God. It's God's precious infants. Very important to understand that. The word infant, it comes from a Latin word, for fare factus. It's a deponent verb, and it means to speak. The present participle infans, fantis, speaking. You put a prefix in front of that, as you well know. You either change the meaning, or you negate it, or you intensify it. That's what prefix does. In this case, in negates it. So speaking, infans, not speaking. So, for example, if you go into the army and you're told to shut your mouth and take your orders, they put you in the infantry. See? When the unborn child is in the womb, it cannot yet speak. It's an infant, not able to speak, and it needs your voice. It needs someone to speak for it. Well, the unborn child is precious because it belongs to God. What we have done with human sexuality is insane in the modern world. Insane. Sexuality is God's creation. It is beautiful. Why is it beautiful? Because you are the result of an act of sexuality. Don't you understand that? A person who is forever to love God, to love God, and to enrich this world, and to be with God forever. How could that be anything but holy and sacred and wonderful? Understand that? But what have we done? We've taken sexuality and with the contraceptive mentality have been excluded God and life and made the purpose of sex pleasure. And we've taken the woman, we've taken her off the pedestal, thrown her on the ground. We opened the door to pornography. The fact is this: when you have denied there's a plan and design of God in sexuality, which is magnificent and good, you no longer can argue against someone else, two men, two women having sex is sterile. Yours is sterile too. And when you allow technology to separate an act of human sexuality from life, from God, from love, which your contraceptive does, then you can't argue against that same technology saying, we're now going to have sex without life, we are now going to have life without human love and sex. It's called laboratory reproduction. Laboratory reproduction. And when we are doing that, we'll eliminate all of God's mistakes. So it's a radical change has taken place. And the church, you as a Christian, you have to withstand once again and say, wait a second, God's sexuality is God's creation. It is magnificent. It is beautiful. And it's one of the highest vocations you have, to be called by God, to cooperate with God in bringing human life into existence. And you have to do it God's way. You know, it's really amazing. Husband and wife, father and mother, double purpose of sexuality, of marriage, unitive, procreative. By God's wise design, in the monthly cycle, you could not conceive if you wanted to. A woman can only conceive actually one day in a month. That's it. There's a mucus present in a 72-hour window there, but that's it in reality. And by God's design, God wants to nurture the unitive aspect of husband and wife and their love for each other. But when it comes that moment in the cycle when God could act, you cannot deliberately exclude God. And what we do now, what do? We make the young people into fools. We give them a contraceptive every day of the month, which is harmful to their bodies, and it's useless. They couldn't conceive if they wanted to. But we treat them like animals. What do you do with an animal? It has no intelligence, stated. By God, we do that to young people with all negative side effects on their bodies. They're taking contraceptive every day. It's absolutely useless. It's harmful. But we tell you to do it because we say, you're stupid. You're ignorant. You couldn't control yourself. Unbelievable. And then it comes that moment when God, the purpose of you get married, God wants human life to come into existence out of an act of human love. A child should be the result of I love you, dear, and you love me, and our love is incarnated in this child with the help of God. It is to be forever and ever. And then what do? We shut out God, we shut out love, we shut out life, and we go down, down, down. Once you do that, you open up the door then to laboratory reproduction. Because if you can shut out life, love, we can shut out life, love in the fertility layouts. So you are in what we call a culture of death, which God's design, God's purpose. And what we do, we had in America Madeline O'Hare, who said, I'm an atheist. I don't want my daughter in school to hear anyone speak of God. We excluded God in prayer. So the first 3 commandments were shot. You can't bring God into the public square. And we started to say, you're a bigot, but insisting on that God's creation of man and woman bringing human life into existence is special and sacred. So the 4th commandment is God. And of course the 5th commandment, thou shalt not kill, God. And once you remove this, so is the sixth of the ninth. The Ten Commandments are gone. Do you know that? And most people are practicing atheists and no resistance. My friend, the people in the West, in the East, they are resisting. And they are bringing God. And they're bringing it back. And what is happening now, it reaches a point amongst young people that they begin to see what in the name of God has been handed on to us. Do we want to hand this on? We want to restore. We want militants. We want courageous people who will restore the Ten Commandments of God. Otherwise, we will be destroyed. You know, I was flying back to the East, and on the way back, I jotted down some thoughts here, which I would just share with you. It was coming back. I heard this program on radio, some commentator, and he was speaking about, here. It says, I wrote this here. These days, one would have to be blind or deaf, not to read in the newspaper or hear on radio or watch on television the unrelenting attack by so many commentators about the Catholic Church, going on for years in the United States, and now more recently in Western Europe, with the shameful deeds of a few. One commentator went so far as to say, this may be the end for the Catholic Church. And I thought to myself, you foolish man, it's not the end of the Catholic Church, but rather of Western civilization, whose flawed leaders, by misusing words such as freedom, choice, equality, have anesthetized the people into passively accepting the removal from the laws of the land all Judaic and Christian values. Without these ethical foundations, Western civilization will collapse and perish into barbarism. For it was the implementing of the moral values found in God's commandments and the recognition in law of the absolute value of every human life created by God that made the laws in Western civilization great and admired. The late Archbishop Fulton Sheen said it's a characteristic of any decaying civilization that the great masses of the people are unconscious of the tragedy. Humanity in a crisis is generally insensitive to the gravity of the times in which it lives. Men do not want to believe their own times are wicked, partly because they have no standard outside of themselves by which to measure their times. If there's no fixed concept of justice, how shall men know it is violated? Only those who live by faith really know what is happening in the world. Country after country, through the legalization of abortifacients, contraceptives, abortion, euthanasia, embryo stem cell research, therapeutic cloning, and on, is institutionalized in a structure of sin and death. Organizations such as the European Union and the United Nations too often are becoming the problem and not the answer, due to certain powerful people and groups who manipulate even these institutions into implementing their worldwide culture of death agenda. Thus, tragically today, the light of life for far too many innocent human beings is going out, especially across America and Western Europe and even Australia, without a whimper from the majority. The light has been dimmed ever so slowly, so that many, without realizing it, have acclimated themselves to live in moral darkness. Others are already despairing of the hope of a new dawn, while those being born into the darkness accept it as the normal condition.